You call this a structural marvel? It is nothing more than an over-engineered cage, and you should be grateful. I even allow someone of your status to step onto this imported Italian granite. Vance bellowed, his voice echoing off the reinforced glass panels as he gestured toward the breathtaking mountain chasm below. I stood completely motionless while he continued his theatrical tirade for the benefit of the 10 billionaire venture capitalists standing directly behind him, all of them wearing custom-tailored suits that cost more than my entire education. My fingers gripped the edge of my digital tablet so tightly that the metal casing began to bruise my palm. But I chose to remain silent as his booming voice cascaded through the open-air pavilion. I simply let the sting of his public humiliation dissipate into the high-altitude air, knowing that within minutes, the arrogant developer would deeply regret every single condescending word he had just directed at me. My name is Kaylin, and despite my unassuming 5'3" inches frame, messy, windblown hair, and preference for rugged work boots over designer clothing, I possess a highly specialized mastery over the invisible forces of nature as a fluid dynamics and microclimate architect. While ordinary builders only see physical boundaries like walls and ceilings, I perceive the world as an intricate tapestry of thermal currents, barometric pressure zones, and aerodynamic velocities that can be shaped to make a structure breathe seamlessly with its environment. This specific project, known as the Obsidian Canopy, was designed to be the absolute crowning achievement of my career. A luxury eco-resort suspended over a treacherous 2000 canyon where patrons could dine in the open air without feeling a single disruptive gust of alpine wind. Achieving this required 4 years of flawless mathematical calculations, during which I meticulously modeled every angle of the exterior spoilers and hand-selected porous carbon fiber baffles to elegantly scatter the incoming gale force winds. Unfortunately, the man currently occupying the center of the panoramic deck was Vance Garrick, a ruthless real estate mogul who measured human worth solely by profit margins and firmly believed that a massive bank account could somehow bypass the fundamental laws of physics. Vance despised me from the very first day of construction, largely because I was a young woman commanding authority on a multi-million-dollar job site, but primarily because I repeatedly refused to compromise safety for his aesthetic whims. Whenever he attempted to substitute my expensive aerodynamic louvers with cheap, solid plexiglass sheets to save money, I stood my ground and firmly told him no, because I knew that altering the airflow would create catastrophic pressure variances. He interpreted every single scientific warning as a personal insult to his intelligence, so he intentionally orchestrated this final structural walkthrough to publicly humiliate me in front of his elite financial backers. The high-stakes tour began early in the morning, and by the time we reached the main observation deck, my stomach was tied in knots as Vance strutted around like a king, loudly taking credit for design features he had actively tried to destroy. He repeatedly pushed me to the back of the group, treating me like an invisible assistant, while he spun grand illusions of wealth and luxury to the quiet, stone-faced investors trailing behind him. "Look at these hideous geometric vents," she insisted on hanging from the perimeter beam. Vance mocked, pointing a finger toward the sophisticated aerodynamic diffusers I had spent months calibrating to neutralize crosswinds. He chuckled dismissively as he turned back to the hedge fund managers, loudly proclaiming that I possessed the aesthetic vision of a factory mechanic, and that he intended to rip the metal panels down the following week to install crystal sculptures instead. As I stepped onto the upper VIP terrace to inspect the final layout, I suddenly froze when I noticed that the structural geometry of the rear wind wall had been fundamentally altered during the 3 weeks I spent away at a testing facility in Zurich to squeeze in an additional row of ultra-premium dining tables and maximize nightly revenue. Vance had secretly ordered the contractors to push the perimeter barrier back and replace the porous angled baffles with a solid, polished, curved glass wall. I quickly pulled a digital anemometer and laser rangefinder from my tactical belt, surreptitiously measuring the new dimensions only to realize with absolute horror that he had inadvertently constructed a flawless parabolic wind concentrator. By tightening the radius of that smooth, reflective curve, he had created a structural shape that would not scatter the incoming canyon airflow, but would instead capture the entire kinetic energy of the wind and focus it into a single, highly pressurized point. My eyes traced the geometric path of the invisible air currents, calculating the exact focal point of the atmospheric convergence, and a chilling smile touched my lips when I realized it landed directly on the velvet-lined throne where Vance was now seating himself. He leaned back arrogantly at the head of the pristine mahogany table, completely oblivious to the fact that he had positioned his own body directly in the crosshairs of a powerful atmospheric weapon. "All right, Kaylin, I will give you exactly 2 minutes to justify your exorbitant paycheck to these gentlemen before we begin dismantling your eyesores." Vance sneered, waving his hand in a lazy, dismissive gesture that drew quiet chuckles from the surrounding billionaires. I took a slow step backward, calmly sliding my data binder into my bag while looking directly into the eyes of the man who thought he could bully the laws of nature into submission. "I do not require 2 minutes, Mr. Garrick, because a single demonstration of basic fluid dynamics will answer all of your questions," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and level against the backdrop of the rising alpine wind. Turning toward the 10 wealthy investors, I raised my hand and advised them in a sharp, authoritative tone to step back into the protected corridor and tightly secure their coats if they valued their physical comfort. Though confused, the sheer absolute certainty in my demeanor caused the billionaires to quickly retreat toward the safety of the interior entryway, leaving Vance sitting completely alone and smirking at the head of the exposed table. With a deliberate movement, I reached out and unlatched a small auxiliary aerodynamic intake valve located on the far western edge of the glass terrace. The moment the valve clicked open, a sudden, powerful blast of high-altitude canyon wind rushed into the pavilion and struck the hard, polished, curved wall that Vance had illegally installed. Instead of dissipating safely, the entire kinetic force of the rushing air was instantly compressed by the parabolic curve, tightening the scattered wind into a hyper-focused invisible jet of extreme barometric pressure that slammed directly into the back of Vance's neck. The localized pressure drop was so violent and sudden that it simulated the physical sensation of rapid high-altitude decompression, causing Vance to choke mid-laugh as his lungs were momentarily deprived of oxygen while intense vertigo seized his brain. He violently threw himself forward onto the table, gasping for air and clutching his ears in absolute agony as the focused vortex swirled relentlessly around his chair, while leaving the nearby investors completely untouched and horrified by the bizarre spectacle. Recognizing the severe catastrophic structural liability of a VIP deck that could physically incapacitate a patron through invisible wind dynamics, the investors abandoned the project that very afternoon and immediately withdrew hundreds of millions of dollars in vital funding. Vance was forced into a humiliating bankruptcy just a month later, while my meticulously documented warnings and ignored safety reports served as the definitive evidence that permanently vindicated my engineering expertise in court. The total collapse of Vance Garrick's real estate empire became a legendary cautionary tale within the architectural community, serving as a stark reminder that ego can never override the laws of physics. Deprived of his investors' capital and facing a mountain of fraud lawsuits, the once untouchable developer was forced to watch the abandoned shell of the obsidian canopy get permanently stripped of its luxury status. Meanwhile, my career experienced an unprecedented meteoric rise as the dramatic legal victory established me as the premier authority on high-stakes climate-responsive architecture. Leading international firms now sought my specialized expertise for their most ambitious projects, ensuring that my blueprints were followed with absolute, unquestioned precision from the very first day of excavation. Today, I no longer have to fight for my voice to be heard or prove my worth to rooms filled with arrogant men who mistake a large bank account for genuine intelligence. When I step onto a high-altitude job site wearing my oversized sweaters and rugged work boots, the new generation of developers listens to my technical warnings with the utmost respect, knowing exactly what happens when you ignore the math.